talk about directing some of the actors in Sopranos? Why don't we start with the matriarch, Nancy Marchand? What was it like directing one of the great actresses in American television?
It was just a dream come true, pleasure, the consummate professional. I mean, totally, you couldn't, I've never seen a person go against type to that degree in my life. She's always a sort of, the most elegant person in the room. And for her to play that part was just staggering to watch happen. She was, on set, prepared. I would timidly ask her to do things, I'm not intimidated by a lot of people, but I would, with her, I'd make sure that whatever I said to her was useful. I wouldn't just go in there talking about things, And sadly, it was sort of the center of the show was her relationship with Jimmy, Tony. And when she passed, it shifted the show, and although we rebounded incredibly well, that was never the plan. Janice, after she killed Richie, was on that bus and gone, She came back into the fold, and the whole show took on another shape, a great one. But she was great, and right alongside her, because they were cohorts, was Dominic Chianese, who was a lifetime character actor, and happy to be there. I have to say, this is the first show I've ever worked on, in I guess 30 plus years, where there wasn't one single diva, not one person who held the company hostage. They truly acted like a family, and Jimmy was the boss. If they had issues, they settled it away from production.
How did you talk about Tony Soprano to James Gandolfini?
Jimmy had a great, deep understanding of that character, and some personal connection that was, was deep inside him, relating to that character. Although he's just a kid from Rutgers, or wherever he went to Rutgers, but he's from work. His father was his father was a janitor, or he was a bricklayer that became a custodian, and very working class. But he would blow your mind. He was an accomplished actor who could play a lot of things. It wasn't just a one-note guy. Jim is an incredibly talented actor. And with Jim, the only thing you would ever have to remind anybody is of, and with a lot of actors, is where they've been and where they're going. And then just sort of gently massaging the performance until it was tonally correct with what the scene required. And very often, those guys bring ideas and bring thoughts about the scene, and you entertain that and you rehearse it and find it, but always prepared.
What about Edie Falco and
forget it. I mean, Jim would always lament that Edie could pick up the phone book and then recite it back to you in 15 minutes. Jimmy, not that he struggled, but he tortured over everything, every scene, every line. And he would take it out on himself, even on set, He would suddenly, erupt, but not at anyone personally, just be, God damn, let's go again, and they would go again. He was a perfectionist, and it didn't come as easy. Edie could just literally walk off the street. She was like, torn jeans and the shirt and the dog, and just get the thing, Carmela, boom, the nails, she was there. And knew, and was not much you could tell her unless you were just telling her something that she needed to know about, again, what was going to happen, where she was going, just to give her sort of an overview. Or if it was, always if it's something that's emotionally complicated to get to, you try to help them get there. But the two of them were magic. Magic I learned from watching them.
Is it difficult for a director when you have actors with two different styles, one who likes to do things quickly and the other one who likes to go inward and
well, It can be, but it can definitely be. But with those two, Jimmy was so respectful of Edie as an actress. He deferred to her, and he was just so gentle with her. And she was as patient as a saint. And, you know, there were times you'd swear they were husband and wife. I mean, you'd be watching the monitor or sitting next to camera, and it'd be a sensitive scene in bed, in the bedroom, whether it was a conversation or if it was a physical scene, you would go, that is a husband and wife. They were just, I guess there was a love and respect for each other, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't all this, you know, it was totally professional, but it was deep in there.
Now, did you have a special identification with the two teenage actors, Robert and Jamie,
Yeah,
seeing them grow since you knew a little bit what they went through?
Yeah, they were babies when they got to the set. They were babies, and they grew. I mean, I think I could relate because I don't know how much acting experience they had. You know, unlike yours truly. And it was great to sort of watch them embrace it and grow with it. And, you know, Robert from being that little chubby kid who, I mean, the most famous line of the first series maybe in the whole show is, what, no fucking baked ziti? To his, and he of course gets screamed at. And to this kid in the end who's suicidal by episode, whatever it was, one of the last 3 episodes, he jumps in the pool and tries to take his own life. So much talent and promise. I just adored them. Right down the line. There wasn't a person that...
How about Michael? Because he here, again, an actor who is thinking about directing.
Michael, really interesting person. He's an artist. He has the soul of an artist. He can write. He can direct. He can act. Totally prepared. Again, I don't know I've ever met an actor who was as prepared as he was. And completely willing to take notes. You know, some people come in, you're going to get what they give you in television, because sometimes they don't, not on Sopranos particularly, but some shows they are very protective of their own. They're guarding their character. Because it's all about trust at the end of the day, isn't it? I mean, especially if you're an episodic director who's not honest or normal, you're like a substitute teacher. What happened to substitute teachers when we grew up? They got clobbered by spitballs and otherwise, you know? But it's all about trust. And Michael was open enough to trust first-time directors, veterans, and he could write. And he wrote some great dark episodes. And he's involved in theater. He owns a little tiny theater that he built out right up on 8th Avenue. And he's an artist, a real artist.
So how was it directing The Sopranos? Obviously, you had the home life, which you talked about, and then the Bada Big life. How was that adjusting to that style?
You know, when I started out, I would always watch Goodfellas before I started an episode, just to tune my mind up, to the world. And the gangster stuff, look, you know, I guess, you know, you're so informed over your lifetime of watching this stuff that you don't even know you're doing it when you're imitating it. And the writing was at such a high level that you would instantly, like, you never struggled. Like some shows you get to, if it's an action series or a sci-fi, you get there and you go, how do I tell this? I don't even know where to begin. What's the scene about, you know? There's no end to it. On Sopranos, it was so clear, so crystal clear, the interrelationships and the storylines. You just had to maintain it. You just had to sort of honor the writing.
Was there any interference from HBO at all in directing?
None. They left David, and to HBO's credit, in all my experiences with them, they have stepped back. They hire the person they believe in, and they step back and let you do your thing. And in David, they got like a veteran writer, director, producer at his zenith.
Now, what was it like with the hiatus of Sopranos? Sometimes it was very long. Was it difficult to get back into that world for you as a director?
It was like aging in dog years. That show was how many episodes? Should have probably taken 5 years, was probably 10 or something. But you know, the physicality of the show, actually the long hiatus helped you get it free of it for a minute. The biggest trick of getting back into it was just getting the actors back into it. Because actors that are away for something for 2 years, that's incredibly difficult to get your mindset back into that world, back into the nature of those. Some of those characters are hard creatures to live with. I mean, and Jimmy would probably tell you, being Tony Soprano was not an easy thing to do for all those years. And he had, and he would say that. I remember an episode where he said, I'm not going to, it was this episode called All My Fu, where the car dealer he's having the relationship with, he has to fling her on the ground. She won't take no for an answer, basically. And he flings her on the ground, and he starts to choke her, and she's like, kill me, go ahead and kill me, you're an animal. She spits at him, and it got to the day with that scene, and he said, I'm not choking her. I said, Jimmy, says he only chokes. I'm not choking her. I said, well, what? I cannot choke another person on this show. I cannot strangle another person on this show, nonetheless a woman. Anyway, needless to say, we battled, and it was a moment, and he ended up having to get back, and because so often you have your personal beliefs, morals, ethics, whatever, and it's sometimes hard to check those at the door. And that was an instance of it just had come to a head, and but so doing episode 1 was always a challenge. Because everyone was still in the summer, summer vacation mode. And it was probably a little more complicated than usual, and sometimes we'd even go back to reshoot things.
Well, one episode 1 is a classic, Members Only. Could you talk about that episode?
Members Only is the, yeah. Members, that's not when he and Bacalov fight. No, Members Only is where the guy wants to get out of the mob, and then he hangs himself in the end. Terry Winter, my dear friend.
You talked about Terry before.
Yeah, colleague.
He's obviously one of the key people.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, Terry, I could go on. David, Terry, same to me. Members Only was, I love that show because it spoke to the sort of that world, the isolated world, and that there was no escape, there was no leaving it. Once you were in forever. And how the repercussions of being in that business literally sort of went through your families and went through everything else. And at the centerpiece of that story was Eugene Pontecorvo, who wanted to get out, and he went to Tony, childhood friends. And Tony said, hey, look, you made a vow. What can I tell you? And the guy had won the lottery with his wife, and he's only got $1 million. Can I leave? No, you can't leave. You'll never leave. And it just made you realize, it's funny with Tony, you've never had a more lovable sociopath in the history of television. Never. Because you found yourself in equal parts rooting for him as a family man and his dilemmas, and then being repulsed by him and by the things that he was capable of doing. And that show is sort of an example of that. And I think that it was a bottomless pit. And I think that Tony realized that he was just going to take as many people with him as he could, I guess. I mean, what was your take on it?
No, I think that's it. When you're doing the show, do you see it more as a genre piece, or are you saying something about, we'll say, human nature? Or saying
I would
something
say it's a comment on human nature.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's not just about the subculture of the mafia. That show comments on every single thing, and that is David and the writing staff's genius. It's about everything. Greed, commercialism. I mean, we spoke to a lot of world issues, in the show. Always pointed out, the faults of our own country and beliefs.
Now, there are any moments that you directed that you recall or you think about, to this day? What are your memories of specific moments?
It's funny. I never really look back. I have to say about I don't know what it is. I guess if I went to a psychiatrist, we'd figure it out after a couple of 20 years. But I'm always moving forward. But I can say that as a life experience, and that's how I look at all of this, as a life experience, really. I mean, it's all, when I'm on my deathbed, no one's going to really give a shit, excuse the expression. What will matter, what I will take with me, are the relationships I had. And that's not just with writers and directors, it's with grips and ADs and craft service people and everybody, and where I was in the world and the things I saw, the things that my family enjoyed because of it. It's collective. If we were to say what were the highlights of that show, story-wise or experience-wise?
Both.
Well, experience-wise, it was being exposed to the level of quality and intelligence, like being around David, being around Terry Winter, Matt Weiner, Robin Green, Mitch Burgess, Todd Kessler, everybody, but mostly David and Terry, because I was with them the most. That experience has been epic. I continue to have a professional relationship with Terry, and my personal relationship with David has gone on beyond the show, and I count him as one of my dearest friends, and Terry is one of my best, and it's just been and what he gave us to do as filmmakers. I mean, when you're in the middle of it, you don't realize it. You just don't see outside the walls of the set. But now, in hindsight, you get to look back at it, and when you hear people talk about it, you go, "Gosh, I guess it was really special," and it meant a lot to people. Top 50, top 10, number 1. I mean, I don't know, whatever it is. I guess at some point I'm gonna have to turn around and acknowledge how proud I am of it. And that started, now I can sort of look at the show. I never looked at the shows after I shot them, which I think drove David crazy. I lived them. And when they were cut, I turned my cut over to David, and he did what he did. I would rarely look at them unless some night I'm going through late TV and it pops up on A&E or whatever it's on. I'll look at it for a few minutes, and I'll go, that was good. Yeah, that wasn't bad. All right, we did pretty good, So I'm slowly starting to come around to the whole experience. It's like delayed stress syndrome or something.
But you were at the premieres at Radio City Music Hall to see
I would
6,000
get
people.
to those premieres, and I'd only be up to here because I was so uncomfortable around crowds and things, and that sort of manic, it just always made me very uncomfortable. That's why, I never, although I'd been fortunately nominated for many awards, I've never gone. And now maybe I'll go in the future if I'm blessed enough. I'll go again, because I think I missed, by not doing that, I honestly would have to confess it. Just not me, my wife, and maybe I missed something that maybe being there and seeing it with each other, with the people I went through it with, the pat on the back that everybody has to admit they need. Maybe I was afraid to do it because maybe it would make me a different person if I saw it and I was around it. But at the moment, I'm okay. And yeah, I could tell it was mania, But again, you're like, you're working 12 to 16 hours a day in a bread factory. Punching a clock is really a matter of the work at hand. And then you leave and you just come home and you have a glass of wine, and you're out. Put on a reality show. So,
We have to ask you about the final program. And did you know the script ahead of time? Did you talk to Terry about it?
The shop was closing down. I think Matt was in and out, but sort of half out. I think he was already starting to work up Mad Men. Staff was down pretty small, and I spent a lot of time. It was hard for me to let go. I have to say I probably acted very strangely in that last 6 months. I did. I think I had interrelationships on set that got strange. It was some sort of maybe separation anxiety. I fell out with a few people. I got weird. I have to say now, looking back, humbly, that I probably misbehaved in some regard. But when I think back to that last episode and experience, I directed if that was number 12, I did number 10, and I was always used to doing number 11. And I was sick about not doing number 11, but that was okay. I did number 10 with Terry, and it was goodbye for me. But I kept going to the room, kept sitting in the room. And I was lucky enough to sit in there for a nice portion of it with David and Terry and sometimes Matt and talk about that last episode endlessly.
What was the initial reaction about that last scene? What that was going to be?
I know that I'm pretty sure David once said that he knew when he started the show that Keep On Believing would be the last song you'd hear in the series, not knowing how long it was going to go, not anything. He just knew, he said, that was going to be the last song you'd hear. I don't think he knew in details how the series would end. I think it was a really complicated and grueling experience trying to figure out how to get out of the series because, look, I mean, there are so many ways. When you boil it down, there's really only 3 or 4 ways to get out of it. Tony goes into witness protection. Tony gets whacked. Tony goes on the lam. Tony turns to the feds. Whatever it is. There's only so many ways that character can get out of it. But I think that what he arrived at is actually incredibly smart because it says to the audience, you know what could happen to this guy. And this is the life he chose. Any one of those things could happen. Use your own imagination. And that's a wrap.
Okay. So, how do you think the Sopranos will be remembered?
I think that it'll always be at the top of everybody's lists. I think that the show will resonate forever. I do. I mean, and that's like coming from a guy who hasn't, didn't watch it 5 times each. I would sometimes not watch an episode I think the work that was done on that show is at a level that's nice.
Well, we talked about James Gandolfini getting into character. What is it like as a director to do one of the violent scenes? Do you have to get in that moment too?
Jimmy's very much a method actor. You've got to be prepared to go to dark places.
So you have to, as a director.
As a director, you sort of have to oversee all of it.
Right.
You have to be able to interface with technicians as well. So I mean, I can't be in a dark space,
Yes.
but I have to know where to get him, and how far to push it. And again, television, it's not like theater where it all has to play out at once. It's you rehearse it loosely once in the action, and it's all in moments, which is the challenge of episodic television, film, is because you have to get up to that same amount of energy every time you're doing it. And in those scenes, you have to plan for things. Like in the opening scene of the opening episode of the last season, where they go on vacation to the lake, and they have the Monopoly game, which goes incredibly badly. It's like Tony needs to he's got the most to do there emotionally in terms of going from 0 to 100, right? So you ask him, do you want to go first? Do you want to go last? Do you want to go, where's the house going to be best for you? Want to just do your close-up first? You want to save the wide for So you have to sort of have some planning. And sometimes it's the wrong guess on his behalf, on my behalf. And you pay for it in the end. Having to get back up after doing all the wide shots, everybody else's coverage, being there off camera for everybody, then getting to you and you're just a wet rag,
And you also worked on another very different series for HBO, one of their other classics of that era, Sex and the City. How did you get involved with that show?
That goes right up there with How Did They Ever Get on Sopranos, off Touched by an Angel. They'd been in the same studio, and they would always sort of flirted with me doing the show. But I was married, and my philosophy was, you stay at the dance with the one that took you. So I was always committed to whatever David wanted me to do, I would do it. And if I had free time, I'd go do something else. But I was pretty much always busy there. And they'd flirted, and I missed out on a few seasons. Then the last season came around, and there was a hole. and they said, would you consider coming on to the show? And I did. And I started prepping, and one of my best friends passed away, and I had to pull out of the show, which I never do, but I just couldn't move forward. And so once again, we were foiled, and I went back to Sopranos. Time passes, and I get the same phone call, please come back. And now I felt beholden that I should, because I felt I left them in the lurch, even though I was only in prep. And I went and did a couple of episodes, because you do two as a, these sort of cross-board two, because they're half-hour shows. And I think they had been through a number of directors, and I think they just wanted a fresh face and a guy that was of a certain temperament. And it was the last year, and things always get heightened in a show in the last year, in every regard. So maybe a so-called substitute teacher that doesn't have any baggage related shows up. And the episode that I had missed because of my friend had a physical element to it. There was a fist fight or something, with Chris Noth and John Corbett or something, which I was anxious to do. Never did it. So I did these two episodes, and then I think they were happy, and they asked if I could squeeze in two more, and those two were the last two shows. Which, there was probably a million people who deserved to do it, but for some reason they were anxious for me to do it, and some of it took place in Paris, and that adventurous spirit of mine, I'll go anywhere on location. In fact, on Sopranos, I went to Naples in the second season, then went to Paris in the end. In what television world do you get to travel abroad, episodic? Anyway, it was a no-brainer, so I took the job. And, the difference is that you'd have to ask Michael Patrick, another great writer, why he hired me or what he thought, but I really had a great time of stepping out of the carnage of that world, Sopranos world, with, bludgeonings and stabbings, beatings, shootings, all of it, which is great, and I love to do, and all the action and all the big weightiness of it, into sort of this fluffy, fantastic comedy.
Did you know you had a feel for romantic comedy? Had you done it before? Or?
No, but I know a good joke when I hear one. I'm not, I would never say that. In fact, I always feel like it's unlucky for directors who get pigeonholed, because I think that a lot of drama directors are able to cross over to do comedy and vice versa. It's a thing you always have to overcome in life in general, but certainly in television. So I went and did those last two episodes, and I just had a blast. The girls were great, and it was light, and everyone laughs all the time. And, it is one of those situations I wasn't used to, and there was like a grandstand behind the monitors, which I learned to live with as well. But they couldn't have been more gracious. And then, like the end of Sopranos, at the end of Sex and the City, everything was heightened. People, it's like graduating anything or moving on. People act out, but it was all fine and dealt with, and honestly, a great life experience.
What was the working environment like on Sex and the City, as opposed to, we'll say?
Well, Sex and the City is, you would get in the writer's room or in the tone meeting, and it's, 8 writers. And everybody's jumping in. It's more sort of a comedy atmosphere, pitching, and but Michael Patrick was like a great showrunner, like a Bruce, like a David Simon, David Milch. You could sit at the head of the table and Terry Now on his show, and just edit everything brilliantly and find what was funny and assign it to the right writers. And on set, Sarah is just a dream and a great, ultimately just the best cheerleader in the world. The crew worshipped her. And the other girls, again, number one in the call sheet sets the tone for the whole thing. And the girls were terrific and professional. Really, no drama. Again, who knows what happens off set, because I don't live off set in the trailer world and makeup and hair, where things sometimes can happen, or I don't know, or in the front office. But all in all, it was an absolute pleasure. And I will look back on that with great fondness, and I do. I haven't seen the show since I finished shooting it.
One thing actually Sopranos, Sex and the City have in common is Sopranos, much funnier series, especially if you see it with an audience, than you realize just watching by yourself. And there are elements of fantastic comedy in it.
The comedy, as a rule, was always born out of the reality.
Yeah.
And that's the best. To me, that's the best kind, you know.
How do you know if something is funny as a director, whether it be on The Sopranos or in Sex and the City?
Well, if you're not laughing when you're reading it, you generally won't laugh when you see it. And the other action is, I mean, I slip on a banana peel tragedy, you slip on a banana peel comedy. You know, Uncle Junior essentially slipping on a banana peel and falling down a flight of steps when he's pontificating. It's hysterical. Somebody shooting an arrow straight in the air and turning to talking to the arrow. I mean, anytime anyone slips, I'm one of those people, I can't stop laughing anyway. And I think David is the king of all that. I mean, he would literally cackle when he would see dailies or something cut where someone would take a tumble or someone would get hit by a car in the middle of some serious moment, sticking the pin in it, I guess. Yeah, we never did out-and-out comedy, but I think David would have admitted in his thing. I mean, Abbott and Costello, Laurel and Hardy, Terry the same way. Honeymooners, Three Stooges, guys holding a plank of wood, he turns, bang, hits the, any of that. We try to apply that to everything.
Now, what was it like directing the four women of Sex and the City? How did that differ?
It's funny because they would say something like, Tim, are you going to get a wide shot? And I said, that's an odd question. Well, a wide shot? We must see the shoes. I said, the shoes? Yes, we have the Monocle Blancly shoes, whatever they're called. Monocle Blancly shoes. We need these shoes. I'd be like, Monocle Blancly shoes. What are you talking? I go, okay, sure. Somehow we'll incorporate the shoes into the shot. And we were in Paris, and Patricia Field would come running onto set. Oh, that extra has that dress. This one has that dress. This one, and then it would get things spinning. And Michael Patrick, we got to move that one to the foreground. And I'm thinking, okay, we got to make a day, and we got to get to what the scene's about. But it was all in great spirit because they understood that the fashion element of that show was just as important. Ensemble had a great importance in terms of the spirit of the series. And it took me a minute to sort of get used to saying, okay, let's just open this up. Let's see, it's a love letter to New York. That's one thing. And then it's a fashion statement. It's like a cutting edge of fashion. So I honored all of it, if I could.
What was it like directing Baryshnikov?
He's a capable guy. And he's got, is he the world's greatest actor? He didn't have enough for me to really judge. I've seen him be great in other things. I think generally the male parts in that series were never as flushed out as the female characters. They were sort of used in a way, they were sort of always to facilitate. He was great at what he had to do. I think they wrote to his abilities brilliantly. I found him to be an absolute pisser. I don't know how happy he was on the show, but he seemed to enjoy it. Went to Paris. Me, Chris Noth, and Baryshnikov out till 6 in the morning with a 7:30 call. Hijinks ensue, great times. Michael Patrick would say, would come in, my eyes would be like this. Come on, we're in Paris, What are you going to do, And some of the crew was there, some of my guys, I grew up with the crew. Chris Noth never says no. It was Fashion Week, whatever. We were out. Michael or John Melvin come and go, what are you doing to Chris's eyes? And he's like, I'm putting guards outside your door. You can't go out at night. And I would say, oh, come on. We're going to go out. So we went, it was just great. I had a great time. And the ultimate is when I saw Baryshnikov in some club. And we were there. And he was dancing. And I think he'd grabbed a cowboy hat off some tourist. And he had a vodka in one hand and a cigarette. He was just camera around his neck taking pictures. I said, hey, look who it is. Who's better than me? This could be 1974 at Studio 54. But it was great. It was great. You're in one of the most beautiful cities in the world on a show that's just at its apex, going out.
And let's, as opposed to Paris, what was it like shooting in New York City? The city that your father took you to and told you all these stories, and you're shooting on location here.
I would often know a lot more about locations in the location department, so it was part of my storytelling process. I could just come up with places or angles or things. And
What shoot do you remember in the city? That you
well, it's Sex in the City. I mean, we locked down Fifth Avenue. It's pretty big. You lock down Fifth Avenue. New York. The Sex in the City was very much a love letter to New York. I mean, so you got to do the beautiful shots of New York, iconic places. For me, I always like to go to the places no one knows about, an angle no one's seen of New York. Didn't get to do that so much in Sopranos. Sopranos, as much of that show was a love letter to New York, Sopranos was not quite a love letter to New Jersey, but it showed the underbelly of New Jersey. It was a different window into a different world, which was equally interesting to me because I really didn't know Jersey. In some ways more interesting because the mundane, the light, it would shoot in areas of light industry, shoot in the Meadowlands, shoot in auto body shops, shoot in neighborhoods that were absolutely blighted, or in the Tony neighborhoods. It was really interesting palette on that show. Sex was same with Central Park West, and
Well, let's go to a different city now. Another HBO series, The Wire in Baltimore. Could you just talk about how you got involved in that series and how that was sort of? What is David Simon's environment as opposed to David Chase's?
They're all geniuses, but totally different. David Simon is a former journalist for the Baltimore Sun. Comes from a journalistic background. And Tom mentored him, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. He wrote the book, Homicide: Life on the Street. Barry Levinson turned it into a series. I think, I remember in a later show I did, David Simon eventually folded into the show, and I think he, like Tom does, incorporate novelists and authors into the show, like George Pelecanos and Richard Price. And so David Simon is a complete Baltimorean. I mean, that is his world, and he owns it. And he is a man of the street. He's seen the dark side of Baltimore, and he's a regular guy. I remember waking up in my rented condo, I'd look out the window or be on the street, and I'd see him walking to Camden Yards with his kid on a Sunday or Saturday after an all-night shoot. I think he's gifted. He's an incredibly gifted writer, a musician. He is a great showrunner in that he does not, once it's yours, it's yours. Once it's given to you, it's all yours on set. And he's not intrusive in any way. And I don't know him as well as I did 3 years worth of it, but I never got to know him incredibly well, but I respect him a great deal. And I think that he's just going to continue to have a body of work. I mean, he's never missed The Corner and Jen Kill.
To break down a Wire script? It seems so complex.
Well, the thing about it is, it's not the sort of a show you could just show up and take your own script and make heads or tails out of it. That is a show that you need to watch every preceding episode and probably read every preceding script. And then you would even have trouble making heads or tails of it. It's so complex. And also, on a human level, it's an incredibly difficult place to shoot, Baltimore, because it's, in some ways, it's a tragic city in some ways, especially in the areas we were shooting in, I should say. It's a fascinating place, and the palette of the city is amazing. So much 18th century architecture survives, 19th century architecture. It has a distinct personality in every regard. It has a distinct personality of its own, cultural personality, socioeconomic personality. It's got everything. So it was challenging, that show. That said, the cast was superb. As a matter of fact, I think we're using Michael T. Williams, who played Omar, will be in this current show. Boardwalk Empire. I love that cast. I take that cast anywhere, anytime. Dominic West and any of the others. They were all brilliant. But it was like a taxing experience to be away. Even though it was an hour and a half train ride, you just felt like you, at night, in those streets, in those ghettos, you saw things that it would just break your heart on a daily basis.
What were some of the most challenging scenes that you directed for The Wire?
You know, seeing children get shot, seeing children overdose. You know, it's those are tough. See, specific scenes, you know, I had a gang shootout in the middle of a block, which was just epic in terms of trying to figure it out. But of course, as soon as you get it together and it starts happening, it imitates life so perfectly, that show. There's no false moment in that show. No heightened moment.
Did you, to get that on film, did you have to talk with David Simon, or did you just, in your study?
I think it's all there.
Mm.
It doesn't take a whole lot. I mean, I think they used, the casting director was superb. She worked, you know, she's worked with Tom on Homicide for all those years, and also, what's his name from Baltimore? Mr. Baltimore. Yes.
Right.
Not John? No, not John Hughes. Anyway, the movie Crybaby with John.
Yes, John Waters.
John Waters.
Yes,
Excuse me, John Waters. Forgive me. Is Baltimore, and so she cast for all these. She understood the world so perfectly, and a lot of the actors weren't actors. You know, a lot of them were kids. A lot of discoveries. And they brought in some very good directors. You know, Clark Johnson and Ernest Dickerson. You name them. They got and they had great writing on that show. And the ADs understood the world, so you could populate those sets. And the sets were just, it was what it was. There was no dressing. It was what it was.
Now, The Wire has one of the most loyal international band of enthusiasts that think that show is one of the best, if not the best, television shows, but it didn't have the largest audience. Could you?
I don't know. I mean, I think maybe it's hard to watch for some people. I think it's hard. Not only that, if you get up to get a beer from the refrigerator, you might have missed a plot point that was key for the whole series. But more than that, I think it was a window into a world that made people maybe uncomfortable, made certain people uncomfortable. That's just maybe it. And incredibly detailed writing, which required complete focus.
Did you have to focus more on a Wire script as opposed to other scripts that you?
Yeah, because they're so layered in terms of technical things that go on with the story, like solving a case. You know, there were so many things you have to remember about it, and there was a large cast you had to follow, and a lot of business that took place. So yeah, I think it might have been, I wouldn't say inaccessible for a large audience, but yeah, maybe that is it. I don't know, but because I would agree to you, I would say that it is one of the greatest shows ever made.
And at the same time, I guess working almost in the HBO universe, you got to, go away from the streets and go to the Roman Empire and go to the Old West. Can you talk about how you adjust almost mentally to, we'll say, direct an episode of Rome?
Well, I mean, it would be like going from the Outsider Art Museum in Baltimore to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You know, you're going to see different things, and you're going to adjust to what you're seeing, but it'll affect you in some personal level. I think that you get there, you immerse yourself in research.
What sort of research do you do?
Voracious amount of reading regarding the stuff, especially if it's historical. It makes it very easy, and especially if it's interesting, like the Roman history. I find it fascinating. There would be a historian, technical advisor there at your resource. You know, he was there as a resource, and so you could get with him in any questions you have. And actually, in a lot of ways, it helps you inform actors, because at the end of the day, the truth is the truth.
And for Rome, you were working with not only HBO, but BBC were involved.
BBC and I think Rai Television as well. Yeah, there were a lot of hands in that pot. But again, people were allowed to do what they had to do. And the show got off to a slightly shaky start with the first 3 shows, and then they were smart enough to go back and fix it. Now that's a show, I'm sorry that it didn't go 5 seasons, or at least 3. Because I think it had a growing fan base, and it has its own sort of cult group that worships it. It was a spectacle. It was a soap opera. It was historical. It was. I love that show, and again, I love living in Rome. And in fact, I've returned there many times since, and I have dear friends that I worked on the show with. I had worked in Rome before that as an actor on a bunch of low-budget films with the Band brothers, the Albert Band and Charles Band. So I had a deep love for the place. Half my family's Italian. They're down south. I still have relatives down there. But anyway, Rome as a professional experience was fantastic, and I had no trouble slipping into the world. None.
What was sort of the most challenging thing that you had to direct as part of the Rome series that you'd never done before?
You know, 90% of it was on a backlot, and which was beautifully designed by Anthony Pratt. And the challenge was making it feel authentic and accessible, and not like some sort of costume drama. Also, making the scripts not feel overly soapy, not keeping them entertaining without falling back on sort of a formulaic. We would, and Bruno Heller was sort of new at the game, unlike those other guys, Milch and all those guys, and Steve and David. This was his first show, and he handled it beautifully. I mean, with the stuff that was being thrown at him, he adjusted. He found what was important in the show, which was really those 2 guys. And I always felt like those 2 guys, it was like the man who would be king. It was a buddy show that was surrounded by all this history, which was like great. And it was just getting going. I mean, I honestly feel like we could have gone on for 3 years in that show. And Bruno was totally up to it, and he totally seized the reins in the 2nd season. And again, the personality of that show was as unique as any other show. I mean, working with a mostly Italian crew, you know, an English cast, and they were all great. What can I say about that show? It was a beautiful show to do. And if I didn't have to come back to do Sopranos, I would have stayed there for more episodes.
Now, the one other HBO show that you worked on, you again were with another TVO tour, David Milch. Could you talk about the Deadwood experience and how that show was organized?
The David experience, I guess, and it's probably common knowledge, is that he is incredibly bright and literate, and it's like an education. You work with him, and everything he refers to is based on some book that he had written, and not that he had written, that he had read. And so he would walk into a scene at a rehearsal, and you know, he was sometimes behind on scripts because he's riffing constantly and constantly living in it and thinking about it. And I think he would often sit in a room with writers and just free associate, and they'd be writing, and he has a whole other process, and it's giving birth every time, you know. So oftentimes preps were maybe a little more abbreviated than you would like, but you were protected because you were really in a world back there that didn't, again, you didn't leave too much, and everything sort of lived there, the horses, the extras, the props, the things. It was pretty much the sandbox. So it gave you a little freedom and time to sort of get the scripts in order. And again, incredibly complicated scripts. I mean, the dialogue is Shakespearean. And you'd have to go back and watch them all before you got to your episode, just to track the characters, just to track the series. And David would walk into rehearsals, and the pages sometimes would just be coming in, and you would get in on its feet. And now this is just my brief experience there. You'd get in on its feet, and then you'd say, okay, well, it says you come in this door, and then Swearingen, you're sort of sitting here. Let's have you over here. And so you rough it in.
Right.
And action rehearsal. And then David would get up and say, okay, everybody, sit down, relax. He would dissect the scene for the crew, for the cast. He would reference literature constantly. He would say, you see, Bullock, if you've ever read the book Martin Eden by Herman Melville, in that book there's a character called so-and-so, and he has a dilemma, and he would literally go into this, and he'd get into the subtext of the situation, and he'd say, that's what needs to happen in this scene. That's who you are. Swearingen, he goes, I'm not sure you're familiar with a book called, Last of the Mohicans. He'd say, your character is directly related to a situation, and he would just spin, he would just lay it out for everybody in the room. You sort of, it's like, I used to call it, story time. But also, coming back from my early days, Bruce and I were still looking at my watch, going, how long is story time going to be? Because we do have to make the day. But nonetheless, that stuff completely informed the actors. So, the script coming maybe a little late, it didn't matter because they would never get that sort of amount of information from just a director walking in who wasn't aware of, in short notice what was happening in the scenes.
Were the other two Davids involved in the rehearsal room like that, David Chase and David Simon?
No. David Simon rarely would be down on set. And David in the beginning would come down, but then eventually you didn't see him anymore. Sometimes for the Melfi scenes, David Chase would come down because they were often complicated. But Milch would come down and do that thing, and then there you went, and then he'd rehearse it again with all those notes, and it would start to take shape. And he was brilliant that way. And he understands the human condition so beautifully, David Milch, He really understands. And so then we would get it to where it would want to be, and then he would say, it's all yours. And then it'd go away. And he trusted me to do whatever I did. And, we've continued to want to work together again. And I honestly, I'd work with any one of those guys again because I respect them so deeply.
Now you're working with different people, not, we'll say, television creators, but more Hollywood auteurs. Could you talk about, your work with Spielberg?
Well, I did Into the West, which was a miniseries that Steven produced with TNT.
How was that experience different, we'll say, from the HBO experience?
It's the Wild West, for starters. It shot Custer's Last Stand, every boy's dream. Going back to me and my toy soldiers, I can't tell how many times I reenacted it, often substituting GIs for cowboys and Indians. But the scenario was always correct. That was, again, I always go back to the life experience part of it. I mean, out in the New Mexican desert, in all kinds of weather, snow, rain, sleet, dust storms, working with historic material, working with the Native American contingent on that show, advisors and otherwise, and handling very sensitive sort of historical events. Steven, of course, he has his hand in it. By the time it gets to you, he was never really on set, but he was in if you turned in a cut, Steven's notes were precise and made absolute sense. Never missed, Although he wasn't on the set of that show, you felt his presence because you knew that this was something he believed in, and he hired all the right people, and it had a sense of authenticity. So that experience was long. I think it was a 3-month experience for me. And again, being on the road, it was tough and challenging at times. And it doesn't have the budgets that HBO miniseries have. So we were working, with some constraints, but we made the best out of it. And I think at the end of the day, I think it's a very valuable piece. I mean, as a learning tool and as an entertainment piece.
Now, talk about the Pacific. You're working with Stephen again.
Yes. Stephen and Tom Hanks, of course. HBO, Tony Toe. They reassembled the team from Band of Brothers and came back and did the right thing, which was to tell the lesser told story of World War II, which was the war in the Pacific, in a greater detail than say Clint Eastwood's 2 movies, which were fine and great. This story actually follows 3 Marines who lived through it. Eugene Sledge, based on the book With the Old Breed. Robert Leckie, A Helmet for My Pillow, and the heroic John Basilone, who died on Iwo Jima. Never had a biography written about him, but he was a Medal of Honor winner and a legendary Marine. So working in this forum on that show, which was sort of this companion piece to Band of Brothers, had a lot of focus on it. HBO, Playtone, DreamWorks, and everyone is very much involved. HBO, Stephen, Tom. It's a world in which Tom is familiar with, and Stephen, starting with Saving Private Ryan, and it's something I feel they agree that they have to tell this story to the end. I don't know.
How much research did you have to do? Just
A
to get-
lot of research, and again, my father was a Marine
Right.
in World War II. Wasn't in the Pacific. He was busy upstate New York typing out memos. But he was nonetheless a Marine, and I relish the stories of boot camp and all that stuff. And I did a lot of research, talked to a lot of veterans, read a ton of literature, watched endless amounts of footage, both films and documentaries. And it was a great honor and a pleasure to do it, and a huge challenge. I mean, we shipped off to Australia, and we were at sea and in the jungles and in the desert, and getting hammered by weather, getting hammered by every third thing that lives and breathes there that can kill you. Jellyfish this big can wipe you out in 15 minutes. A tree that you touch has you on the ground shaking like a leaf within 5 minutes. Snakes, crocodiles, birds with horns. I mean, anything. The beauty of it is that we were responsible for telling the story of the Battle of the Pacific, starting with Guadalcanal and ending with Okinawa, and given all the tools and the sandbox to do it in. And it was daunting. I started out in episode 1. I had a lot of contact with Stephen, who had a lot of opinions about it, and had a great vision about it. There was Tom, who was completely engaged in it, who felt it had a great sense of purpose about it, and that's special. When people care about something, it makes all the difference. You can suffer all you want, but if you can wake up in the morning and know that you're doing something you could be proud of and that'll resonate in the future, it makes it a lot easier to go to work.
Is this project one where you had more special effects than you ever?
Oh,
How's
things blew up. Things blew up every day. I mean, we had Stephen's people, his people from Munich, and from Band of Brothers, and Saving Private Ryan. I mean, we had the best of the best, and it was a massive machine. Tony Toe, the producer, the great producer who did Earth to the Moon, Band of Brothers, and this managed to put together more or less the same crew, and it was a cast of thousands, and I think we achieved great things with it.
When does it set to air? Right now